Right. Plain Jane Laura Beth would be living with a famous artist who still grieved his equally gorgeous, equally wonderful wife. Common sense plucked away her fear. She had nothing to worry about. She smiled and said, "Hello?" Constanzo ambled to the back of the plane. "Can I get you a drink?" She turned to watch Constanzo as he approached the bar. "No, thanks." Antonio stopped in front of her. With his wind-blown hair and sun-kissed skin, he looked so good, so sexy, that her mouth watered, especially when his dark eyes met hers. "What are you doing here?" Reminding herself Antonio wouldn't ever be attracted to her and she had to get rid of this crush, she peeked back at Constanzo again. He batted a hand. "I hired her. She's out of her apartment and had no permanent job. It was a perfect timing." Antonio's lips lifted into a smile that would have stopped her heart if she hadn't known he was off-limits. "Oh, that's great." The pilot announced they'd been cleared for takeoff. Antonio pointed at the leather sofa, indicating Laura Beth should sit. Then he sat beside her, close enough to touch, close enough that if they hit turbulence, they'd tumble together. She squeezed her eyes shut. Stop. She had to get a hold of these wayward thoughts or she'd drive herself crazy living with him. She was not in this guy's league. She'd figured all this out yesterday. She was common, pregnant, and needed a job more than a crush. They both buckled in. The little jet taxied to the runway of the small airstrip and took off smoothly. It climbed for a few minutes and leveled off before the fasten seatbelts light blinked off, and the pilot announced they anticipated an uneventful flight, so they could move about the cabin. To settle her nerves, and maybe waylay the attraction that zapped her every time she looked down and saw Antonio's thigh mere inches away from hers, Laura Beth pulled a book from her purse. "Ah, I loved that novel." She glanced at the book, then at Antonio. "I never took you for a science fiction fan." "Are you kidding? Some of the best art is in science fiction. The imaginations and imagery required are magnificent." Laura Beth smiled, glad they had something normal to talk about, but her stomach picked that exact second to growl. Her face flushed. Antonio laughed. "You skipped breakfast." She hadn't been able to eat breakfast. It seemed that now that she knew she was pregnant, morning sickness had kicked in. I wasn't hungry when I got up this morning." Antonio unbuckled his seatbelt. He reached for her hand. "Come with me." She undid her seatbelt and took the hand he'd offered. Her fingers tingled when his warm hand wrapped around them. As he pulled her up to stand, she reminded herself to stop noticing these things and followed him to the back of the plane. The area she'd believed was a wet bar was actually a small kitchenette. She gaped at it. "You have to be kidding me." Antonio nudged his head in the direction of his dad, who had fallen asleep on the sofa across from the one where Antonio and Laura Beth had been sitting. "Anything my dad could possibly want is always stocked on the plane. When we arrive at our destination, any food not eaten will be donated to a charity." He laughed and opened the small fridge. "How about eggs and toast?" Her stomach didn't lurch at the thought, so she nodded. Antonio studied her. Not very enthusiastic. So let's try French toast." "I love French toast." And she hadn't had it in forever. He motioned for her to sit at one of the bar stools, obviously needing her out of the way in the tiny space. He hit a button, and what looked to be a grill appeared. "This is so cool." "This is the life of a billionaire." She glanced around, remembering her thoughts from the night before. She didn't look at the plane as somebody who someday wanted to own one. She counted her blessings that she was here and had a job and a place to stay. "It's kind of fun getting to see things that I wouldn't normally see." He frowned. "I don't understand." "Well,